my first question to you is, tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in the past year or so, being at Amazon Philips, and also the work that you've done with the government of Connecticut during the pandemic.
So post my retirement from PepsiCo, when I stepped down as chair in February of 2019, the last 2 years has been more than 2 years, 2.5 years, have been very interesting in that I've now been able to embark on a whole range of activities. So it started with Governor Lamont in Connecticut saying, hey, can you be the co-chair of Connecticut development, economic development? So I took on that assignment. Amazon invited me to be on their board. So I joined the Amazon board, one of the most consequential companies growing very rapidly. So I'm learning a lot. I took on the job of mentoring a whole bunch of startups as they try to grow. I took on the assignment of teaching at the US Military Academy in West Point. Mm-hmm. In the Behavioral Sciences and Leadership Department. I was on the board of the International Cricket Council, so I could get engaged a bit more in cricket. I joined the boards of Philips, the medical company, and then joined the board of Memorial Sloan Kettering, the cancer hospital here in New York. So my life has been pretty full working on all this while writing this book. So taking a trip down memory lane and, working to pull this book together. So it's been a very full and fulfilling life the past couple of years. And, once this book is put to bed, now the question is, how do you go off and work with all these companies or organizations working on support of young families and trying to work with them to advance the agenda?
Okay. You talk about the Moonshot solution in the book, building a system of affordable care plus flexibility and paid leave. And you've illustrated that with examples in your own book, how that at crucial times helped you in your career. Do you envisage a solution to this in your lifetime? And from your conversations that you're having, what is the response you're getting?
I definitely expect that people will move to solutions in our lifetime, my lifetime for sure. Let's look at the trifecta: paid leave, flexibility, predictability in workplace and time, and childcare. If you bring the three together, what COVID did was one good thing. It advanced the technology to enable remote working. Mm-hmm. Zoom developed fast, Teams, Chime, Google Hangouts, all these developed because of pandemic. And people started to accept remote working as an acceptable way of work. And on top of remote working, flexible working hours also became sort of acceptable. As long as you deliver on an output, it doesn't matter whether you work from 9 to 4 or from 4 to 9. Okay, and so that's the only good thing about COVID, trust me. And so I think if you have enough paid leave in the system, if you really develop the technology and tools and the mindset to allow hybrid work, come into the office when you can, but work remotely and flexibly at other times. And then for those days, you need childcare, have childcare support, the system can work. And I think we're very close to that. Everybody realizes that, especially for women who carry a disproportionate amount of the burden of, home care duties and childcare, because you're also so smart and so hungry and want to really contribute to paid work, the only way to allow them to fulfill their hopes and dreams and engage in paid work is to have this infrastructure support. And if you don't do that, you're losing out on the talent of these incredible women. Mm-hmm. And in a world where talent is what is the biggest driver of competitive advantage, Rithika, I think people are realizing more and more that women represent the biggest emerging market opportunity inside every developed market.
How did your early years in India and your values from there inform your role as CEO at Pepsi?
I had a very, very solid upbringing, very disciplined, very structured. And in many ways, a lot of the life's lessons I learned came from that upbringing, from the stability, the roof over our head. There's so many things that gave you stability, gave you confidence, that life builds confidence in you. And as you move along and come in to be the CEO, you build on those experiences. You add a whole portfolio of experiences to what your upbringing started you off with. You listen to mentors, you listen to supporters, and then you build your portfolio of capabilities as you move along. And that's what I did. But at the end of the day, the core, I am that young girl from Madras who grew up in an environment where there was discipline, there was a frame, you were given freedom within the frame. You had parents who had one foot on the brake and one foot in the accelerator. So I know all my boundaries. And I work hard to make my family proud of me, the country of my birth proud of me, and the country I'm thriving in be very proud of me. So I feel like I owe all of them a debt of gratitude. So I live by those rules and expectations that are self-imposed in my day-to-day functioning.
Okay. What has your time in corporate America taught you about leadership, especially as a woman? And what can men and women leaders learn from each other? What traits do you look for in a leader?
The old model of leadership was leading with the head and the hands. Come in and be a little bit more imperial as a CEO. It was like a model where it was always a male, stay at home, a spouse. It was wrong to even talk about the family while you're at work. It was a very, very different approach. I think recently what you've had in the last decade or so, people bring a bit of a heart to the job and saying, hey, maybe CEOs are people too. They do have families, they do have partners, they have kids maybe. And maybe the ideal CEO is somebody who realizes that the employees are not robots. The employees are not tools of the trade, but assets. When you think of your employees not as tools of the trade, but real assets, you'll deal with them very differently. And so I think the whole emotional coefficient and the empathy part is becoming a bigger factor in CEOs today, the human side of leadership. And I think the new breed of CEOs are now beginning to bring that human side to show a little bit more. And people are pleasantly surprised how the employees are saying, we have a real person as a CEO. Because what happens is when you start to showcase yourself as a human, you look at others as humans, as people with real issues, joys, hopes, dreams, ambitions, families, society behind them. You look at issues differently.
Certainly, you led by example, because you mentioned in the book that you wrote letters to the parents of your employees. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, when I first went back to India after I became CEO, most people congratulated my mother for bringing me up the right way. And I think very few people congratulated me. Nobody said to me, congratulations. They sort of perfunctorily look at me and say, congratulations, and go to my mother and spend a lot of time telling her that she must have done something right to have me turn out the way I did. Made me pause and say, if people feel that way appropriately so, my parents had a big say in how I grew up. How come I haven't thanked the parents of my executives who give so much to PepsiCo? So it started with me writing to parents of my direct reports. In fact, I even went and visited many of them in their homes because I wanted them to know me. I wanted to know them. It was an unbelievably transformative experience because when I wrote to them, the emotions that got unleashed were just unbelievable. Mm-hmm. The emotions they felt when they got this positive report card on their kids, because it's only going to be positive, right? I'm writing about a senior executive, that somebody would acknowledge their contributions to corporate America through their kid was just, it was their children were shocked by the emotion. I was not surprised, but I was touched by some of the letters and little gifts and the cookie boxes that came back with their little notes. And then I started to expand that. I think by the time I left PepsiCo, I'd written to parents of about 300 or 400 of the executives. I'd always written to the spouses a handwritten note once a year to thank them for all the hours that their spouse was giving to PepsiCo, but expanding it to the parents made a huge difference. Huge.
I want to speak to you about what you did at Pepsi, some of your most significant work. Do you think companies will be open to adopting the model of sustainable capitalism that you launched much before it became a fashionable term, especially in view of the BLM movement and increased awareness about companies doing the right thing and the climate change challenges as well, which we're all talking about?
See, I wasn't doing anything at PepsiCo because of some movement, something short term. I started all this way ahead of time because I believe that's the best way to future-proof the company. I felt these were the big trends in society that were going to impact the company. If we didn't change it, our performance would be impacted. So to me, it wasn't about giving away the money we made. It was about how we can change the way we make money. For example, environmental sustainability. We said, look, guys, if we reduce our water usage, we would keep a license to operate in societies that are water distressed, and we save costs. If we reduce our plastic usage, we can reuse the plastic to make recycled bottles. So I always stated it in, how do we change the way we make money? Instead of buying virgin plastic, incorporate some recycled plastic. Pay less for water, but we're also helping communities in the process. As opposed to use as much water and then write a check to some local organization to save water. You get me? So I wanted us to mirror the pains of society and address them in points. And so I think that in those days, that was the right way to approach things. It still is the right way to approach things. It's just that when companies don't approach it that way, you get activism from all of the well-meaning activists and the NGOs who say, you got to do something on plastics, you have to do something on water, and you have to do something on B and C and D. I think if we all thought hard about these activists and NGOs, what they're saying is not completely off. We should be doing it anyway on our own.
Earlier on in your book, you mentioned India's brain drain, and that continues to this day. What would your advice be to the Indian government?
I think India has now got a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem, a startup system, unicorns. India's got many, many coming up. But I think there's still a way to take the best brains in the country, the ones who graduate from the IITs, the top schools, figure out a way to deploy them in the country to further the country, which means that we've got to remove burdensome regulation, find a way to incentivize them to stay in India. Or if you want to go overseas, come back and contribute to the country. We've got to set up incentives for them to stay. And we've got to figure out how to create innovation parks, whatever it takes to tap their innovation for the betterment of the country. The big advantage India has is this talent base. But deploying some of the best brains to improve the education sector, because we have such a wide variety of quality of education. How do you take the bottom 50% and improve it? Why can't you use the top 20 or 30% to improve the bottom 50? And just as we have Teach for America here, how do we get tutoring for India, Teach for India in a much more significant way and deploy these grads to help India? We have to evoke the patriotism to the country and get them to contribute. There's work to be done.
Early on in the book, you mentioned an incident at Checkers. Who was the prime minister in question? Was it David Cameron?
I am not mentioning it all. That's one thing I'm leaving out of the book, but it was quite an experience.
No, I have a question about that. Not so much about who the prime minister was, but when they asked you why you had not moved to the UK and to the US, your response was, if you had moved to the UK, you wouldn't be sitting in Checkers. What do you think the US gets right about merit and diversity in boardrooms?
I'm not talking about the time that I moved to the US, not today. Today, things are very different. So I'm not a person coming in today. In those days, when I first migrated to the US versus the UK, the US was viewed as a country that valued talent, that was welcoming of everybody. And as long as you were contributing and you were competent, the US gave you a chance. And I'm a living proof of that. I've had so many mentors and supporters who've lifted me up over the years in the US. I've had opportunities for jobs and promotions, even though I was dressed badly or I just didn't look the part, but they said, hey, there's something in her that we like. And people went over and above the call of any normalcy to give me a hand and pull me up. I mean, the example is the train company flying 2 plane loads of executives to Chicago so that I didn't have to travel to La Crosse when I was 9 months pregnant. Mm-hmm. They could listen to the presentation that we were going to give. So I've had incredible acts of kindness, generosity, and support from leaders in the US. And I think the US was way ahead of any other country in doing that. And even today, I'd say, in spite of all the criticism we get here in the United States, this is still one of the greatest countries in the world, if not the greatest country. It's still welcoming of people, still gives people a chance. And I'm watching around me the number of immigrant people who are CEOs of iconic companies. I mean, just take Google, Microsoft, and these are all run by immigrant people. NVIDIA, any of them. I look at this and I go, if you want to really have a chance to be anything you want to be, as long as you're willing to contribute and make a difference, this is a country that values you for who you are.
Kamala Harris, when she became vice president, the first Asian and the first African woman to do so, and from South India, if I can be parochial. How proud were you of that achievement? And what does that say about the US? Because in the UK, we do not have anyone who is as senior as that, from an community.
Goes back to what I told you about the US. It's still one of the most open, welcoming countries, as long as you have the capability. I mean, Kamala Harris was born in the US, so she was a US citizen by birth. So that even qualified her to be the vice president. And the fact that Biden picked her was all a spirited choice. So it just goes to show that the country is truly, truly open if you're qualified. So, you do have a sense of pride about all of that. At the end of the day, though, it's not the heritage alone that counts. It's what you deliver on the job. And that's what we were talking about. You don't get a job and keep it because of your heritage. You get a job based on your capability and your competence, maybe your heritage too, but then keeping it is much harder, keeping the job. So you've got to demonstrate value, you've got to demonstrate that you're good at the job. And that's what Kamala Harris is working on right now. I have no doubt she'll do a great job, but she has to prove that Biden made the right choice in appointing her vice president, because the whole world is watching.
Yeah.
I know her. She's very, 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 very smart. But this
Have you met her?
Oh, yes. It's a global political scene. So the expectations on her are sky high. So, that's, was there a second part of the question, Rithika? I forgot.
We don't have an equivalent thing in the UK.
In the UK, well, like I said, the US is way ahead of any other country.
Mm-hmm. I want to speak to you about diversity quotas. Do you think that they can help build the broken pipeline, as you call it, in the UK and in the US? In the UK, they are being, it is happening because companies are not doing as much to increase their diversity in terms of race and gender as well. Do you think quotas are the way forward?
Having a critical mass of talent in the different parts of the pipeline does help. If there is bias that's actually discriminating against a group of people and you have to force people in, then quotas help. The thing to be very, very careful is that you bring people in, you have a quota program and you bring people, you don't want these people to be looked at as a quota hire. So you've got to make sure that they don't feel bad about their hiring. So how you position it, how you talk about it is very, very, very important. But if you don't have a critical mass of diverse people moving up the chain, you'll never get them to the top. So we have to prime the pump.
Were you ever seen as a diversity hire?
In my early days, when I first joined PepsiCo, somebody referred to me as a quota hire.
How did that make you feel?
I didn't care. I said, you can say what you want. I'm going to do what I want to do. I mean, if I don't like a certain decision that you guys are making or a certain acquisition you're proposing, I'm going to make my point of view felt. I don't care whether you call me quota hire or whatever hire. I'm here to run corporate strategy, and I think this acquisition is bad. So I was fearless. You know, the difference, Rithika, is the following. My husband was working, and we didn't care whether my salary came in or not, because we were used to living on very little.
Right.
So as we moved up, we didn't expand our spending to fill our new wealth. So we could live on the same thing we lived in before. So we said, we both don't need to work, but let's go to work knowing that we're always going to tell the truth. So it was liberating in its own way.